This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Harry's, the shaving gear you will respect, not throw away. Go to harrys.com and use the promo code MacVoices to let them know you appreciate a superior shave. Welcome back to Mac Notables on MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have Jason Snell on the line to talk about all kinds of things, Incomparable, Macworld, WWDC. I think we'll just cover it all, Jason. What do you think?
Whatever you like, Chuck. I am here to serve. I will answer all questions put to me.
That's that's tempting.
I didn't say I would answer them truthfully. I just said I would answer.
Okay. Jason, to start out, you have kind of an interesting policy. You will appear on pretty much any podcast, anyone that invites you. You've stated this publicly.
I mean, at some point it might become a problem, but I've said that many times that I'll be on I'm happy to be on anyone's podcast, because I get people asking me like, gee, I thought about asking you to be on my podcast, but I don't know, you're very busy. And it's like, I'm happy to be on people's podcasts. Podcasting is fun. And I really enjoy, as a host of a podcast, I enjoy not being the host.
I've heard other people say that, and I've had that very same experience, that it changes the dynamic completely.
It does. I don't like sitting here talking to you. I'm not thinking of the time. I'm not thinking of what questions I'm going to be asking you, things I need to follow up. I don't have to do any of that. I just have to sit here and answer and talk. And I'm happy to talk. Anybody who's heard me on any podcast knows I will go and go and go. So I'm happy to do that. That's the easy part. It's the talking or listening to someone talk while in the back you've got the separate process running, to use computer jargon, that is saying, what's the time? Do I need to cut them off? Is somebody else trying to talk? If you're in a panel environment, that happens a lot. Did we cover everything? What's the next question? If there's a lull, how do I fill that with a new question or a new topic and get the conversation moving again? There's a lot of moving parts happening behind the scenes that you internalize and you don't think anything of it. And then when it's gone and you're just a guest, it's great. It's taking a load off. So I don't envy you, Chuck, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about it, because I think that a lot of us that host podcasts do some of those things almost naturally. You kick into host mode and you're running all those questions in your head. And so it is almost disorienting to suddenly pop up on a show and let someone else ask the questions and worry about all those things you just listed. But it's also a challenge to be the one to answer the questions intelligently on the fly.
Yep. Yeah, it is. It's a different kind of use of your brain. But I would say that on a show like The Incomparable, I'm also a participant. I don't feel like I just can't resist to have my own opinions in there. And so I'm playing both parts, where I'm trying to figure out what my arguments are while also moving the conversation along. So to remove one of those is enjoyable. It's true. If I'm in a situation where I'm just an interviewer and the whole idea is to interview somebody else, like if I'm on stage at a conference and my job is to interview someone else, like I just did that at the UL conference in Ireland. Guy English and I hosted the talk show that was one of the nights, where we interviewed a bunch of the panelists who were going to be on the next day. And there I'm really trying to entertain the audience, but also show off the guests. And so then I'm shutting off the other part. It's like, it's not about me at that point. It's about me showing off them. And then you can turn off the guest part of your brain and just focus on the host part.
And it's an interesting balance. Again, I think that you are very conscious of it with The Incomparable. I'm very conscious of it when we do a Mac jury panel. I want to participate, and so I selfishly will participate to some degree. But you also have to remember, and even on the one-on-one interviews, it's not about me. It's about you. You're the star of this episode of MacVoices, and so I've got to make it about you, no matter how much I may want to join in the conversation in a big way.
Yeah, it's a balance, and I think I struggle with it every time. Am I talking too much? When I edit the shows, I often will cut things I say out. And so it's walking that line where I'm not willing to give it up. I want to talk, but I'm also not willing to, I don't want to override everybody else. So it's this is all inside baseball for people listening. Although if you're a listener to podcasts, which I hope you are, because otherwise why are you listening to this? I think that would be something that you would notice too, is maybe you don't think about it in this way, but it's does a host is the host bringing things along? Did it go off the rails? My least favorite episodes, you talk to people about least favorite episodes of a podcast, like the Incomparable, this happens a lot. And it's often about unpopular opinions. And I don't, that's not the problem. My least favorite episodes are ones where I feel like I let it get out of control, or that people had good things to say and I didn't find a way to let them say them. And that's, I think people will find those unfulfilling, but they won't know why. And as a host, it's sort of that's my job to try and get it to all work and have everybody get to have their say. And sometimes you lose control of it. So it's a thing that I think hosts think about a lot, and listeners don't think about, but I think they know it when they hear it. They may not know what they're hearing, but they know that something's wrong and things are out of control, and they don't like that. So you're kind of producing your show on the fly, because this is not one of those things that gets heavily edited. Even my show, which gets edited, doesn't get heavily edited. It really is what comes out here is going to be the show. And so, wow, that is a lot of pressure, because if something is going adrift, you have to adjust in real time. For example, you're sitting here thinking we're talking about hosting podcasts now. To do that up front in this episode, when we could be talking about Apple stuff or pop culture stuff or something like that, are people really going to want to listen to this? Should I move Jason along right now?
But I think your point is well taken, that it's good for them to be educated a little bit. It also is good for people that are thinking about, gee, I might like to do something like this.
Which is everybody, because everybody will host a podcast at some point.
And a lot of people, fantasize about it or say, I've been thinking about it. Well, these are a couple of the things that you need to think about if you're going to do it well. If you're just going to sit down behind the mic and do a stream of consciousness thing, and there are people that can do that and are good at it, but not many. I'm sorry, but they're just not.
Yeah. It's not easy. I mean, whenever I see Daniel Jelkett stop doing his interview podcast, Bit Splitting, after like 20 episodes, I was the one who killed it. I'm very proud of that. I was the last guest. I was like, wow, shut it down. That was so bad. We're just going to end it right now. He seemed a little defeated by it. And I said, Daniel, podcasting is hard. Interviews are hard. This is all hard. And I know that there are lots of podcasts out there, but that doesn't change the fact that it can be hard, and that it's hard in a bunch of different ways. And the fact that anyone can do one is really exciting, but it doesn't change the fact that there are a whole bunch of different skills that you have to learn. And I was really happy. It seems strange at the time. I didn't feel happy about it, but in hindsight, I feel happy about it. I got an email from somebody who said they listened to the first episode of The Incomparable, or the first few, and they said, wow, you've gotten a lot better as a host. I'm like, well, hey, are you saying I was terrible? Yeah. But at the same time, God, after 200 almost episodes, I damn well better have improved. Otherwise, why am I even doing this? So, everybody learns, and you learn on the job, and it's a weird set of skills required to do podcasting, but because you're producing it too. It's not like a broadcaster who just goes there and shows up and they're technical people. We are the technical people too. So yeah, it's interesting. It's fun. I love it. I love the medium, and I love doing it. And I'm glad people seem to love it, because that's part of the reason that it's so great, is that people really are attached to podcasting, and they love the people who are on the podcast. They feel they know them in a way that text on a screen just has never done.
When will we see an Incomparable video podcast?
Wow. Producing video is so hard, as you know. And we have these panel shows, so it's very difficult. We are experimenting with that with our Dungeons & Dragons podcast, Total Party Kill, which is a spinoff that's on theincomparable.com, where we play games on the internet for your amusement. And we've been using Google Hangouts for some of those, and we post those and make those available as a separate kind of just raw, unedited video if you want to watch us play, and we stream those live. And we're actually right now, Dan Morin and I were just talking, we're experimenting with the idea of doing Twitch, which is the famous video streaming site that may be being bought by YouTube, I guess. And we may do our next D&D thing on that. So we'll stream it live, and there'll be an archive, and we're figuring out how to do it so that people can see the map. So they know Google Hangouts, they can't see the map that we're all looking at. So we're trying to figure out a way to share our Google Hangout via Twitch and see if that works. So there's weird technical stuff. It should be easier, and eventually it will be. But that's where we're experimenting with video, with the, because I don't know. It's a challenge technically. If you've got 5 or 6 people, it's hard enough to get the audio right, to get the video right. Then you're dealing with a Leo Laporte situation where you really need a director who's directing it while you're doing it, and that's not going to happen. And I'm not sure there's a huge appetite. It's growing, but a huge appetite for a bunch of talking heads in their basements talking about comic books. Maybe I'm reading that wrong.
Well, I have to say that knowing a lot of the people that are on the Incomparable, and also just the feel of the Incomparable, I would enjoy it, seeing the video, because I think there are a lot of smiles and there's a lot of laughter, and the facial expressions would have to add to it. But that's just me.
We've tried it. I think editing it would be a problem, and there is a lot of editing, so it would have to be an unedited version. And then honestly, John Siracusa is our big problem here because he uses a Mac Pro. It doesn't have a webcam, and so he just sort of refuses to be on video. And I told him I'd send him a webcam, and I think everybody's a little. It does add, before we started talking, I got like a light out and I turned my camera around so you can't see my washing machine and all these things. And I mean, it is a little intimidating to be seen instead of just being heard. The bar is a lot lower. And when it's 10 or 11 o'clock at night, which it often is for my podcast when we're doing it for the East Coast people, that's asking a lot. So we're going to experiment more, because what we do on the Incomparable is nothing but experimentation. We try crazy stuff all the time, and I'm sure we'll do more crazy stuff with video. But right now, it's the D&D stuff that seems to be a good place to experiment with video, because it's a little more constrained, and there is this culture of people watching other people play games that is out there, and we're tapping into that a little bit.
It's just, and I have to confess, I just did it. I know what I would like, but on the other hand, I'm someone who knows what it would take to put that together. So I'm not sure I'd wish that on anybody.
Yeah,
I want it, but I'm not sure I would wish it.
I'm impressed that you do this. I am not on very many podcasts that have a video version. It's you and Leo Laporte, and that may be it. And it's a challenge. We're trying it actually at work, outside of the Incomparable. My actual job is at IDG, and we're trying that with our Clockwise podcast to do that as a video and actually carve up the segments and post them attached to relevant articles on the topics we talk about. And we're experimenting with some of that there, that like, if we can capture this conversation, why not capture a video version of it and use that somewhere too, so people have the option of seeing either one. And that's just an experiment, but I'm enjoying that experiment. But it adds a whole layer of effort. Later today, as we record this, I'm going to do one, and it's going to be a video one. And, we're all going to have to do our video setup and make sure that everybody's recording. And, we're going to use Google Hangouts, I think, to do the master file, and we'll see how it goes. But it's a whole other layer of technical challenges when you're dealing with video, and people's expectations are pretty high for video, because people are used to super high quality produced professional video. And, people of our generation anyway, my kids don't care. They're watching Minecraft videos, but we're expecting the TV news, and that's a high bar. This
is going in a direction I really didn't expect to go in, but
see,
but I do
post-brain kicking in.
Yeah, post-brain. But I want to ask you about that, because I find that an interesting choice. That if I heard you right, you're taking parts of the Tech Hive, a Clockwise podcast, cutting them up and then dropping them, say, on a web page to supplement something, as opposed to taking the entire program or all of those components and spitting it out as a video podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, we might do it as a video podcast at some point. Honestly, it comes down to filthy lucre, which is there's demand for video advertising on our websites, and a general feeling that a 30-minute long video isn't going to get very many views. And so if we cut that Clockwise into 2 or 3 4-minute segments on certain topics and then attach them to stories about those topics, we're adding to our video inventory, and we have demand for video advertising. So it's a way to turn a 30-minute long show into a bunch of short topic-based videos that are more likely to be watched by people because they're short. And it's like I said, it's an experiment. And we'll also post them as standalone videos sort of on their own. Our video system actually our internal video system can't even support a video that's 30 minutes long. It's too long. We would have to post that on YouTube or something. And we might get there and do that. But from a business standpoint, it's more interesting to try and see whether there's value in cutting them up. From an audience standpoint, a video podcast might be much more successful. And I would like to experiment with that. It just hasn't gotten high up on my list enough to figure out how would I do it? Where would that serve from? All of that sort of thing. Because then I would have to figure out, where am I serving those files, and how am I building the feed, And our CMS content management system that we use to publish the websites is not designed for podcasting. We actually use third party. We use SoundCloud for our audio podcast right now because we gave up on trying to get our CMS to do it because it was never a priority. So if we did video, well, I don't know where that would go. That would be a whole other challenge. So, it's out there. It's interesting, but the immediate demand was, how do we get more short videos on the site? And I thought, hey, why don't we cut up clockwise and try that? So that's what we're trying.
Interesting. And I did not realize that. So I'm going to have to go and check that out as an approach. Everything you said makes perfect sense. And yeah, this is, again, inside baseball. I'm just intrigued at the way everyone approaches how they're producing, what they're producing, for what reasons, and for what audiences.
Yeah, some people have a plan and some people don't have a plan. And yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm doing with the Incomparable is completely intuitive, and I don't have a plan other than that I think something is cool and worth trying. And at work, I do some of that. And I also make some decisions based on thinking about what the business needs are. And, and sometimes that leads to really interesting directions. I mean, we don't really do the podcasts for the money. Honestly, our podcasts, I'm sure we could probably be better served spending the time we spend doing the Macworld podcast and the Clockwise podcast, just doing things on our website. But I feel pretty strongly that we need to have them, and that there's value in them, and that ultimately there's probably some money in them too, but that really there's value in us having them. The video thing is like a side. It's like, hey, if Clockwise is a cool podcast and out of it comes some revenue generating videos, then everybody wins. And we'll see, but that's a very different thing than me saying, what if we played Dungeons and Dragons on the internet? That's just, let's see what happens.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother discussion. I'm fascinated by the idea that people want to watch other people play games.
It's a thing. It's a real thing. And that's Twitch, or the value of Twitch, people watching other people play video games. Then again, we all watch big burly men playing football and baseball and things like that. And that's a huge thing. And that's not us playing them, it's us watching them. So maybe some of it is generational. And what I found too, and actually I wrote an essay for the magazine right when it started about trying to understand why I liked sports and why a lot of geeky people don't. And one of my arguments for sports, which I lifted from Nick Hornby, the English writer who wrote High Fidelity and is a huge soccer fan, is there's no author to what happens in sports. There's no writer who you can't look at the narrative and say, oh, I know how this is going to end, because nobody knows how it's going to end. The story is being written before your eyes. And that's really exciting because you can't predict, you can't get spoiled. It's just happening now, and it can be incredibly dramatic, and nobody knows what's going to happen next. And the feedback I've gotten about our Dungeons and Dragons podcast is actually kind of the same thing, which is people are not just enjoying it. I thought they'd enjoy it because, like the match game or something, it's a bunch of funny people talking and saying funny things, and the game is not important. I think there's an aspect of that, but I think there's another aspect, which is this is almost like an audiobook. It's a story. We are in a role-playing game. They are interested in these characters and what's going to happen to them. And you don't know what's going to happen next because we're rolling dice and making bad decisions and getting ourselves killed or almost killed. And I think that's an aspect of it that goes for all of these watching people play games thing, which is the unexpected. It's not calculated. Like every time you see a movie or a TV show, you can sit there and think, oh, I see what's happening here. I know what's going to happen next. This is how these kinds of stories go. And that doesn't, with sports or games, that doesn't happen.
That's an interesting perspective, and I never really thought of it in exactly those terms, but suddenly watching video games makes a certain amount of sense. And these are not, asteroids or Pong. These are true. Yeah, I mean, that would get a little bit much, but these are games with plots and with twists and turns that can take a lot of different directions. So, and
strategy, right? A lot of them are very strategic, the games that people watch, and they're players who are also sort of saying, how do they do this? How do these people manage to do this? So that's an aspect of it too. And some of it's just fun and funny. I mean, my kids' Minecraft video obsession is really about, can you believe that there's this thing that they did in Minecraft? And then they will often try to go do that thing in Minecraft themselves, which is cool. So there's some aspirational stuff and there's some storytelling in it. And it's definitely a thing. and hard for us to understand. The best I've come up with so far is it's not that different from watching a baseball game. You're watching somebody else play something for your entertainment. And, we culturally, sports was something that was acceptable for that, and games was not. But that doesn't mean that there won't be games, computer games that are, or tabletop games that are actually sort of spectator sports. Weird.
Yeah. Well, see, there we go. It's not weird. It's just, it's a different generation. It's different things.
It's not something we would understand intuitively. You got to think about it a little and sort of say, oh, I see why that's happening.
Well, and I'm sure there are things, and I can't think of a good one right now, but I'm sure there are things that previous generations have found entertaining that they did as entertainment or viewed as entertainment that we would think, why would we ever go back and do that? Why would you want to? But that's just the way it is.
Sure.
Before we leave this, I wanted to make sure, I think I have this right. Don't you have something on your website that a feed that has all the podcast appearances you do?
Yes. I mean, you mentioned earlier that I'll be on any podcast, which is true. To a point. I mean, if there's some evil podcast out there, I would never agree to be on that other than to denounce them as evil. But I built a thing as a part of the Incomparable.com. I've got this sort of feed template set up. So I set up a thing called the @JSnell Anthology, which is literally just I paste in my appearances so that I had a couple people ask about it. I was losing track of where I had appeared. I suppose my mom can listen to it. I don't know if other people want, but I actually like the idea of being able to track people around the internet and say, I've heard this a lot about, like, I want to know when John Siracusa is on someone's podcast, and instead you got to go find it. And so I just built, it's like it's just like a link list, except it's a podcast feed of my podcast appearances. So if you go to theincomparable.com/Jason Snell, all one word, you will get a list of my appearances for the last 9 months or something. And there's a feed that you can subscribe to that's feeds.theincomparable.com/jsnell. And it's what I've said is, it's like, imagine a podcast where the guest stays the same, but the host and the format and the topics always change. It's like an inverse podcast. That's what that feed is.
I like it. I think it's great. All Jason all the time.
Yeah, well, I like I said, I think there are definitely people out there. Like 5x5 has this person feed that when John Siracusa was on 5x5 with Hypercritical, it was actually a great feed because you could get, if you love John, you would get all the Hypercriticals, you'd get all the episodes of The Incomparable that he was on, and any other 5x5 show that he was on. And I thought that was a really cool idea. And so that's been kind of percolating. And, John on hypercritical.co has a list of sort of like articles and things and all of that. But I always thought, if you're on a lot of podcasts, which I am, why not do that as a podcast feed and a website so you can go? But it's like, if you like what I talk about, you can subscribe to it. And then, I'm on a podcast every other week or so of somebody else's, and it's there, and everybody should do it. I'm not saying, I'm talking, Glenn Fleischman thought it was a good idea. I think I might set a version of it up for him. People who are floating around like that and are on a lot of podcasts, it's kind of a fun alternate way of viewing podcasts, and you get exposed to podcasts you might actually discover that you like that you didn't know exist. So welcome to all of the J. Snell Anthology listeners who are listening to this episode because it's in that feed. This is Chuck. Hi.
Hi. Yeah. Nice to have you. Come back soon.
See, I'm on your show, but you're also on my show. That doesn't exist.
Which is it's a really sneaky way of making me do the work for you. So I like it.
Yep. You're welcome.
I like it. This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Harry's, the shaving gear you will respect, not throw away. Let's talk about razor handles. I know. Seems like a trivial thing, right? Think about it, though. This is the piece of equipment that you use pretty much every day of your life. This is the piece of equipment that is the only thing standing between your face and a razor blade, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5. Get the wrong one, and you get a poor shave at best, and a bloodletting at worst. That won't happen with Harry's handles. From the Truman, with its zinc alloy core and polymer coating, to the Winston's precision-grade aluminum and comfortable heft, Harry's handles feel good in your hand. Substantial. Solid. Like a MacBook Air. Not too heavy, not too fragile. Just right. Want to give yourself a treat? Check out the Truman SS14 for more stylish colors and a wood end cap, or get your initials engraved on your Winston. Why? Just because. Then pair those with Harry's blades, which fit all of Harry's handles. Each cartridge holds 5, count 'em, 5 separate German engineer blades in a Gothic arch pattern. What's a Gothic arch pattern and why do you care? You can read about it on Harry's website if you're interested, but the important thing to know is that it's important for a good shave. Each cartridge also has a rubber hinge to flex to the contours of your face. Because flexible is good, since you don't want those 5 sharp blades to cut anything other than whiskers. All that adds up to a superior razor and a superior shave. One of life's little treats each morning. And we all need little treats of one kind or another. Why not get yours now and get $5 off your first Harry's order with the offer code MacVoices? Whether you go for just a handle and blade to get started, a shave set to sample handle, blades, and Harry's shaving cream, or dive right in and sign up for a custom shave plan, you can save $5 with the code MacVoices at harrys.com. You're going to love it. Harry's, the shaving gear you will respect, not throw away. Thanks to Harry's for their support of MacVoices. Well, the thing I really wanted to get you on here and talk about has to do with the Incomparable. Jason,
I was prepared to talk about WWDC, but I am happy to talk about the Incomparable.
Well, we'll get there, but it's not exactly about the Incomparable. But I listen to the Incomparable. I hear you on the Macworld podcast occasionally. I hear you on a lot of the other podcasts, and I am really impressed by the volume of material you seem to get through. You seem to get through novels. You seem to get through comic books. You seem to get through movies, TV shows, and then there's this day job thing that has to do something with Apple. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You go through a lot of stuff. So I would like to know what devices and what media you use to accomplish this. And what I mean by that is, what do you use your iPad for? What do you use your Mac for? What do you use your phone for? What do you consume audio? What do you consume video? How do you accomplish this? Because just the sheer volume intrigues me.
Well, I mean, with a lot of the media stuff, it's stuff that I've already seen or watched, and I got to say, after about 200 episodes, I occasionally will be like, I'm going to run out of things that I've seen, and what's going to happen then? But I don't know. I do a lot more watching and reading for the podcast than I used to. A lot of my watching and reading now is tactically. It's directed toward things we're going to talk about or that we might talk about. So that's, I don't have a lot of. When I was in college, with the college I went to and the major and minor that I had, I took one elective in my time in college. All the rest of it was required. It sort of feels like that sometimes, where I'm watching a lot of things and reading a lot of things because they're required because I need to get to them for the podcast. But in terms of the technology part of it, movies, still don't go out to the movies as much as I would like. We just got out of the habit when we had kids, and although my kids are old enough now that we could probably do it, honestly, now a lot of the times we want to bring the kids, and they've got things, and like I haven't seen Amazing Spider-Man 2 because I was on vacation, and then the 2 times that we had to watch it over last weekend, my daughter was not available for one, and my son was not available for the other, and both of them wanted to see it, so we didn't see it. In the house, I do iTunes rentals of new stuff because I don't have Netflix on disc anymore. So I do iTunes rentals of new releases. We use Netflix for a lot of catalog stuff and a lot of TV stuff. We have a TiVo, so we're watching some shows there. The amount of time we have to watch TV is dramatically decreased with the kids too, because we can't watch any kid-unfriendly content until after about 9 o'clock when the kids go to bed. And our house is very small. We can't really close the kids away and watch Game of Thrones at 8 because the kids are around and they're going to hear it and they're going to walk in and they're going to see that guy's butt and that lady's boobs. That was the most recent episode. And so, even when they're asleep, I close the other door, the hallway door to the bedroom. So we've got extra warning if they pop out, because that can happen. So it's a challenge to find time to watch TV and movies. For my wife and I, for things that are not kid appropriate, and we struggle with that because there are a lot of great movies. We watched Zero Dark 30 the other day, and it was like we were up until midnight watching it. But it was like, thank God we finally saw an adult focused movie, not a kid movie. So that's a challenge. Reading when I'm when I take the bus, I take the bus some of the time. I drive some of the time to work. When I take the bus, I can read on the bus, so I'll read novels there. I read mostly on a Kindle Paperwhite, which I love. It's just a dedicated text reader, and although you can read on an iPad, and I have an iPad Mini Retina, I prefer reading on the Paperwhite because it's lighter and it's less kind of glowy in my face, but it still lights itself up, so I can read it. And I like not being distracted by switching to Twitter when I'm reading a book. I can't do that on the Paperwhite, so that's good. Comics I read on the iPad Mini, which is big enough for me for comics, and I buy a few comics on Comixology every week. Even now, I was buying them on the website already because I wanted Comixology to get a bigger share than Apple was giving them. So when they pulled out of the App Store, which is a complicated issue, and there are lots of bad feelings, enough bad feelings to go around for all sides, I think. But I'm still reading on Comixology. And if there's a comic I really love, I'll buy the hardcover on Amazon later. So that's books and comics and movies and TV. And video games I don't play very much. I just don't have the time. I'm trying to work my way through the Last of Us right now, which is a PlayStation game. It's really probably too much for me. I'm playing it on the easiest level. It's still very difficult. I just don't have a lot of experience with these games. But we're doing an episode about it, so I'm going to push through it just so that I can know what I'm talking about when we do an episode of The Incomparable about it. But I'm not, that's been a challenge. And I don't. We've got an Xbox and a PlayStation and a Wii, and my kids play those some, although they play a lot of Minecraft these days. And for me, I love the games that we've got, and I just never get a chance to play them. That's a place where I end up throwing things overboard, where games just kind of fall by the wayside because I've got other things going on. So I think that's my media consumption in a nutshell.
Podcasts? At the risk of taking us back into that.
I listen to podcasts because I do have a commute. Unlike most people who do podcasts who don't have a commute, I do have a commute. And so when I'm on the bus, I will walk to and from the bus stop and I'm listening to podcasts then. When I'm driving, it's all podcasts, and I'm driving a lot more now. And so depending on the week and how much I'm driving, sort of depends on how much I'll listen to podcasts. I'll also listen when I'm washing the dishes or mowing the lawn or things like that. But the bulk of it is in the car or on the way to and from the bus. And, that's where, and I listen to a lot of different podcasts. There are some that I listen to every week. There are some that I listen to when I get the chance, and it really is determined by how much time I'm in the car. And then there are ones where I just pick and choose based on the topic. But I do love listening to podcasts. And, I have to say the ones that I listen to the most, I'll just list them because I think they're great. Everybody listening to this probably knows about Accidental Tech Podcast with John Siracusa and Casey Liss and that other guy, Marco Arment, right. See, I just wanted to have it not be Casey as the third guy. And I listened to The Bugle, which is by two English comedians, one of whom is John Oliver, who now hosts a show every week on HBO. He used to be on The Daily Show. That's a very funny podcast about current events. And The Flophouse, which is a bi-weekly podcast, so every other week podcast, fortnightly, as the English would say, about bad movies, where three very funny guys, including two writers for The Daily Show, and a very funny guy who's a bartender, who's a friend of theirs, watch a bad movie, and then immediately after watching it, they turn on the mics and they talk about it, and they are hilarious. So those are my three favorite podcasts.
Interesting. No tech. Well, Accidental Tech.
Accidental is sort of my number one. And then I got a bunch of other tech podcasts that I listen to, but not necessarily every episode. Those come and go. There are lots of those, and The Prompt with Federico Vitici and Stephen Hackett and Mike Hurley is a good one. And there are a bunch of Back to Work and the usual suspects of tech podcasts are floating around in there. But I try to mix in, on the pop culture side, I will also listen to, there are a couple Doctor Who podcasts, 2 Minute Time Lord and Verity, that are both very good that I listen to. There's some sci-fi podcasts that I kind of dip in and out of. And, there are a bunch. They come and go. I'm pretty eclectic with a lot of those podcasts, mostly because I don't have the time beyond that top 3 or 4. And I'm also listening to Lex Friedman's daily podcast that he does, which is 5 minutes every day, every weekday, which is just fascinating because I'm just waiting for him to go insane. Podcasting every day. It's crazy.
So, the one other thing I wanted to ask about podcasts. Are you one of those like me who certain podcasts you'll hit at double speed or maybe even triple speed?
I have always been a 1x guy. And in fact, when people tell me that they listen to the Incomparable at other speeds, I say the Incomparable is not supported at any speed other than 1x. You listen at other speeds at your own risk. That said, I am beta testing. So 2 apps just came out. Castro just came out with an update that's got a fast mode that sounds much better. I never liked the sound of it. There was always sort of like a clippy, tick, 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 tick. When the speed up didn't sound very good, so it drove me crazy and I couldn't do it. Castro's new version, the speed up sounds better, and I'm beta testing Marco Arment's Overcast app, and the speed controls there are very good too. And it takes a lot of extra work to go down to like core audio level and do things with the audio that the Castro developers seem to have done and that Marco is definitely doing. And that's got me listening at 1.25 maybe. So I'm listening to some things slightly faster, but I don't like how it sounds. It starts to sound crazy, like crazy people are talking, and the artifacts get bad. So I'm a recent convert to slightly faster than 1x, but not a lot faster.
I find that it depends on the individuals talking. Because some people naturally talk faster.
Merlin Mann cannot be experienced at anything above 1x, in my opinion.
I agree.
Without risks to your health.
Yes, I agree. But also, I think it depends on the delivery and what kind of podcast. If it's people discussing a subject that is serious, I think those can be consumed faster. There are other people that perform their podcasts that there's no way I want to listen to anything other than 1x because you miss the timing, you miss everything about what makes it a great podcast. So I think it's a pick and choose kind of thing. There's some I will absolutely not listen to anything less than 3x because that's all the time I want to give it and still get something. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You are the Evelyn Wood of podcasts.
No, listen, it takes some time. There's no question about it. You have to work your way up. But after a while, I've tried to compare it to, and I have very limited experience in this. So you and I both think, I think you do, in English. And when you're trying to learn a foreign language, that moment when you start to think in the foreign language, that's what...
Or it's like reading without subvocalizing, right? Once you're reading and you're not reading every word out loud in your head, but you're actually just reading the words and processing them, it changes how you process it. So I get it. As a podcast producer, that I am filled with horror at the idea of a 3x podcast. But yeah, it works for people. Like I said, unsupported, but do what you like. Yeah. And if it causes brain damage, it is not the fault of the podcaster. Any podcast program worth its salt will let people select speed per podcast, right? Because some podcasts can do it and some podcasts can't.
Yes, I agree. And I don't like it as a producer, but as a listener, I find it an invaluable tool.
Sure. Yeah, I just don't want to know about it. That is essentially what I'm saying is, as a podcast producer, if you're listening to my podcast at 2x, I don't want to hear about it. I just don't want to know because it is not produced with 2x in mind. I have thought about speeding up an episode just to see what happens, just for everybody.
Now that's an interesting idea.
Or slowing down an episode just to see what happens. But I haven't gotten there. That's the David Letterman fan in me thinking, what technical things could we do experimentally just to screw things up for everybody?
Yeah,
maybe one day.
How can I really mess with the audience? I like it. I'm a little surprised to hear the comic books on an iPad mini. I would have thought you would have preferred an Air or something else to give you the bigger experience.
You're talking to a guy with an 11-inch MacBook Air. I like the small devices. I love how small the iPad mini is. And I really thought that I would prefer the Air because it's so much lighter than the full-size iPad. And it was tough. It was a close call between the Air and the mini. But I really... I just like the size of the mini way too much to give it up. And with Retina, those comic book pages are pretty darn readable. Certainly the single pages are very readable. The spreads are actually pretty readable even at that size. I mean, it's the same number of pixels. It's all just a little bit smaller. And, ask me in 5 or 10 years when my eyes are dramatically worse, because I'm in my 40s now. So it's coming. The eyesight is going to fall apart. And then I may need a larger device. But right now I can I can do it and it looks pretty good. So I'm happy. It's just the size of the device overall. If all I was doing was reading comics, I would buy a big tablet that could display comics big and beautiful in full HD, and maybe that would be an iPad Air, or maybe it would be, if I was buying a dedicated comic reader, maybe it'd be some crazy, maybe it could be a Kindle Fire or something like that. But I use my iPad for a lot of stuff, and comics is only one of those things. And the comic experience is good enough on the iPad Mini Retina that I can get by with that, and I love all the other things that I can do on that Retina iPad Mini with the small size.
I'm not exactly surprised at this, but one thing you didn't mention is the Mac in any of that mix. Are you just not someone who consumes media on the Mac?
The only media I consume on my Mac is music, and that's when I'm working. And the music that I listen to while I'm working is familiar music. So it's entirely from my iTunes library, not from a streaming service, not from iTunes Radio, Pandora, Beats. Because I actually am a subscriber to Beats, and I will listen to it on my phone. But on the Mac, I can't listen. Some people can't listen to music when they work, or music with words when they work. I really work well with music, but it has to be music that's very familiar to me. So that's it, though. I don't watch movies on my Mac. I don't read. I read the web on my Mac, although I do send a lot of that stuff to Reading List or Instapaper. And I'll watch like movie trailers or something when they fly in off of Twitter. If I'm on my Mac, I'll watch them there. But that's it. I don't use my Mac. I used to use my Mac for that, but I've got an iPad now, so I don't need to. And on my iPhone, I only consume, unless I'm like traveling and I don't have my iPad with me, which is pretty rare. I'm only really consuming music and podcasts on my iPhone. And there I will listen, depending on the situation, I will listen to unfamiliar music with something like Beats, or I'm listening to podcasts. Usually there it's a question of whether I want to explore music, whether I want to read, in which case I want familiar music, or whether I'm listening to a podcast.
I find it interesting that you specifically said you consume music on your Mac, familiar music from your iTunes, but that on your iPhone, I think you said you use Beats. Now, I'm sure there's some overriding.
It depends. It depends, right? If I use Beats, if I'm not reading or writing, and don't want to listen to podcasts. Sometimes if there's no podcast that strikes my fancy at any given moment, I'll explore a Beats playlist or something. It doesn't happen as much as I would like. But my problem with music discovery is I love discovering new music, but when I'm discovering new music, I can't be working. I can't be reading. And podcasts have eaten into the time when I'm just listening to something, because now I'm listening to podcasts. So, or other, spoken audio content, audiobooks or things like that, but mostly podcasts. And yeah, so it's a challenge to find time to do music discovery, but sometimes it happens that I'm walking somewhere. I'm walking, I get off the bus early and I'm walking a mile back home or something just to walk a little bit, and I'll get tired of the podcast, or I'll reach the end of the podcast I want to listen to, I'm in the mood for, and then I'll throw in the music discovery. I do when I'm reading, like on the bus going to work, I'm listening to familiar music while I'm reading a book or the newspaper.
Jason, as always, you're very generous with your time. I don't want to leave our time together here without touching on WWDC. And I think I did this once to you before, and I'll do it again. What do you think we need to see? Not what we will see or the rumors or any of that, but what do we need to see from Apple at WWDC to carry us through into the next year?
Wow. We need to see where OS X is going. I think that's an open question. They were pushing it toward iOS. And then with Mavericks, they stepped back from that, obviously, and said, well, we're not going to force these things together. I interviewed the executives. They told me that directly. They're not going to force these things together. But where does it go now? Is it going to look different? Is it going to look more like iOS or not? Is it going to look like something else that we haven't seen before? Or is it just going to sort of stay the same? Where does the Mac go? I got a lot of questions about that. And then with iOS, the question is, we need to find out what Apple's priorities are. I want to know what Apple's priorities are for iOS. iOS 7 was a big change in a lot of ways. Now, that was easy for Johnny Ive to sweep in and say, we're going to make a bunch of changes. The question is, now what? Now what are the functionality priorities? Where is the platform going? Is it going toward simplicity? Is it going toward complexity? And, Microsoft just unveiled the Surface 3, which is a tablet that essentially is a laptop. And there are rumors about a bigger iPad and the iPad's being able to run 2 apps at once and things like that. And that's added complexity that starts to push it toward the world of the MacBook Air. So I think what we need to see is some definition from Apple about what Apple, where these platforms are going and how Apple is defining them, because that will have a big impact on what products they release. It'll also have a big impact on developers and users. Like, is the iPad firmly in the sub notebook area, or is it becoming also more notebooky in the way that Microsoft is pushing the Surface? Will there be an iPad Pro kind of thing? Will there be multitasking? Is it going to get more complex? And on the phone side, I'd say similarly, there probably won't be a new iPhone at WWDC, but hints about where the phone is going. Is the phone going to be, the developer tool is going to really make it easier to have a bunch of different sizes of phone. That's interesting, not just because of like the future direction of the iPhone, but what is the iPhone? What does Apple think the iPhone's role is versus the iPad versus the Mac? Developer conference can be a good time to learn those things, because the developers are the ones who need the extra time to get ready for this. So, this is one of the rare cases where we're looking into the future with Apple, that usually they drop products and they make an announcement and they're out that day or that week or like a week or two later. WWDC announcements, there may be some things that are available that are new, available that day to everybody, but the big story is about these operating system revisions that won't be available to the general public for several months. And so it is our chance to look at sort of where Apple's going, and they need the developers to be on that ride with them. So they have to communicate that to developers, but that means all the rest of us get to hear it too. So I think that's what we need to hear from them. I don't think we need a particular piece of hardware. I think we need to hear some things about where how they define their products, because that's going to say a lot about where they go in the next year. What is the role of those, Mac, iPad, iPhone, and something like the Apple TV too? Sure. What are their roles? Where do they fit in? Where does Apple see this going? Because they could go in a bunch of different directions. We just don't know. And this is a good opportunity to hear directly from the horse's mouth. This is what we're going to do.
Really interesting to hear you phrase it that way. I feel like up till now, Apple's done a pretty good job of explaining where their products fit and what they do. Unlike Microsoft, who they can't seem to decide what they want a device to be. The new Surface, and I've read probably not nearly as much as you've read on it, but it's got the touch screen, but you can add a keyboard. But it's got a stylus. It's like, guys, commit to something instead of trying to be everything.
Their strategy is to be everything and not commit to anything.
Oh, man. And I don't get it.
And hope that eventually somebody says, hey, I want this, which has been up to now has not happened.
Yeah. And so to hear you say that, I agree with defining the platform going forward. I just feel like it's been pretty well defined up to this point.
It has, right? But there are always course corrections. And when you have rumors about larger iPhones and iPad Pros and Retina Minis, and there's this question of convergence and do they converge or not? I mean, they have been clear. They believe that we don't, that like tablet versus laptop, where everybody said tablets will replace laptops. Apple's opinion is laptops are great for laptop things and tablets are great for tablet things, and people have both. And people have a phone and a tablet and a laptop, and they use them all differently, and that's okay. And that's been their take. But again, this is a chance for them to redefine that if they choose. And maybe what they end up doing is sending a strong signal that they haven't changed, and that the Mac is still the Mac, and the iPad is still going to be what we think of as the iPad, and the iPhone is the iPhone. And even that is a message, right? So even if what they send is, look, we are what we said we were, that is a clear message that in the next year we won't be seeing them tack one way or another and take make the MacBook Air simpler or make the iPad more complex. So even sending that message is a message. They're setting the table. I feel like WWDC sets the table for a lot of the discussion about their products because of the operating systems that drive them for the next year. Even if it's just that may very well be a restatement of principles that we already knew. That is certainly a possibility.
Do we need a media statement? Do we need a services statement? iCloud, Beats, streaming, Apple TV services. Do you see that as essential?
Oh, well, I mean, I feel like we need them to do better at cloud stuff. But how they say that, they say lots of things about it. I think they got to do it. So, if we get the sense that what they say is encouraging that they're going to do it, then great. But I don't feel like we need a particular announcement. I'll tell you what I like about iCloud. I wrote about this a little bit a few months ago. I would like a coherent view of iCloud. If they're going to do iCloud, I would like to get somebody to stand on stage and say, here's what iCloud is. It's everything. It does all these things. It's all integrated and it behaves the same way everywhere. Right now, iCloud is not anything. iCloud is a bucket that stuff gets shoveled into. So, iTunes in the cloud for purchase songs and iTunes Match are sort of in iCloud. And PhotoStream is sort of in iCloud. And I work in the cloud. I work on the web, and that's sort of in iCloud. And syncing your passwords and your, on your keychain and things like that, and your backups of your iOS devices, that's iCloud. And a lot of these things are not related, and they're only, they just have got a label that is iCloud. And I feel like that's one of the challenges is I would like Apple to be show a little more coherent message of what iCloud is, as opposed to if it's online and it's Apple, it's iCloud, because I don't think that's a good enough definition. And I think that's what we have right now. And when you try to share a photo and find that iCloud means creating a photo stream, it gets very frustrating very fast. Like, well, wait a second, why can't I look at my photo stream on the iCloud website, even though it's in iCloud? And the answer is because you can't. It's not good enough. It needs to be coherent. They need to have that message. It doesn't need to be perfect. I just want it to be coherent. I want to feel like they have a vision and they know where they're going with it, and not that the vision is we have a bucket that we shovel things into.
I would agree. I think iCloud is an essential thing. Some of the others, I wonder. Strategically, maybe they can't announce all the things we'd like them to, or make some of these things clear because they may not be clear yet for them.
Totally true. And when I say I want an indication that they've thought through iCloud, that's sort of what I'm getting at is, I hope they have. Saying I want them to say it is not, the saying will reassure me, but the saying is not the important part. The important part is that they will have done the thinking and the understanding that iCloud right now is kind of a mess and that it needs to be better. And here's how we're going to make it better, that they're thinking those things. Because if they haven't thought those things and so they have nothing to say about it, the problem is not that they didn't say anything. The problem is they haven't thought those things yet, and they need to, I think. So yeah, it's definitely not. It's so easy for people to get caught up in Apple and say they need to do this because I want it, because of me. I want to hear this. I want them to say this thing because we need to be reassured. It's like the saying is an after effect. The saying just proves that they thought it. And I'm concerned about them thinking it. I would like iCloud to be a lot better and a lot more cohesive, a more coherent vision that makes sense across all the platforms and all the different apps. That's what I would like, because I think it would make their offerings much better. I think it's lacking. Hearing them say it is just, I'd like them to indicate that they are working on this and they do have a vision of it. Having the vision is the most important thing. I think they gotta get that right.
I think we'll leave it there. I think that's a great place to close it, and we'll see just how much of what we've talked about we actually get.
Yeah, we'll see.
I hope a lot. I
hope so.
Jason, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here. I hope to maybe cross your path in San Francisco at WWDC, but if not,
hope so.
This has been a lot of fun.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for having me.
We'll do it again. And for all those folks who are listening in on Jason's show, looking at my show, nice to have you too.
That's right.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do now. Is I'm going to sign off from my own podcast within everybody else's podcast.
Yeah,
sure.
Feel free. Any closing words you want to shoot?
Stay tuned for the next episode. Who knows what it will be?
Yeah. Who knows who will be sitting in this seat? Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Notables on MacVoices. It's great to have Jason Snell, and it's great to have you here too. As always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.